The crimson sky of Kepler 442b burned with the fire of dying ships as Commander Zextala watched the battle unfold from her command position atop the ridge. Her four eyes tracked the movements below with predatory precision, each pupil independently focusing on different aspects of the conflict. The rebellion forces had chosen their ground well. The crystalline canyons provided excellent cover and made orbital bombardment nearly impossible without risking massive collateral damage to the planet's valuable mining operations. Zextala stood 8 feet tall, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming purple-black in the alien sunlight. Her species, the Veltar, had ruled the Hegemony Empire for over 2 millennia, and she was the finest example of their genetic perfection. Every movement was calculated, every decision backed by centuries of tactical knowledge downloaded directly into her neural implants. She was 28 standard years old and had never lost a battle. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked her as royalty among her people. "The human auxiliaries have broken through the third defensive line," reported Subcommander Crix, a smaller, more agile member of the insectoid cave species. "Casualties are within acceptable parameters." Zextala nodded. Humans were useful for exactly this kind of operation. Their primitive biology made them naturally aggressive, and their short lifespans meant they fought with a desperate intensity that more civilized species couldn't match. They were classified as Class 7 sentients, barely above the animals that roamed their homeworld, but they had 2 qualities that made them valuable. They bred quickly, and they died without complaint. The hegemony had discovered Earth 300 years ago, during the early expansion period. The humans had just developed nuclear weapons and were still confined to their single world, primitive beyond measure compared to the galaxy-spanning civilizations that had already risen and fallen by that point. Initial contact protocols classified them as a developing species, suitable for uplift programs and eventual integration as a client race. But integration had never happened. Humans proved remarkably resistant to the standard neural conditioning that made other species compliant. They couldn't interface properly with advanced technology, their brains too chaotic and unpredictable for the quantum computing systems that powered galactic civilization. Worse, they showed alarming tendencies toward violence and unpredictability that made them unsuitable for anything beyond the most basic manual labor. So they had become what they were now, cannon fodder. Expendable soldiers for the hegemony's endless wars, their natural aggression channeled into useful directions. They were given basic energy weapons, minimal armor, and pointed toward the enemy. Most died within their first few engagements, but there were always more humans being bred on the factory worlds. "Sir, the rebel forces are consolidating around the primary mining facility," Crix continued. "Intelligence suggests they're planning to use the thermal generators as weapons." Zextala's mandibles clicked in irritation. The rebels were always clever, always finding new ways to turn infrastructure against the hegemony. This particular rebellion had been ongoing for 15 standard years, led by a coalition of species who refused to accept the natural order of galactic civilization. They called themselves the Free World Alliance, as if freedom meant anything in a universe governed by the fundamental laws of might and genetic superiority. "Deploy the second wave," she ordered. "Send in the Cave shock troops to support the human advance. I want that facility secured within the hour." The battle below intensified as her orders filtered down through the command chain. Zextala watched with professional interest as the humans pressed their attack. They moved with a fluid aggressiveness that was almost beautiful in its primitiveness, their simple tactics somehow effective against the rebels' more sophisticated defenses. Where other species might hesitate, calculate odds, or request additional support, humans simply charged forward. It was fascinating in the same way that watching predatory animals hunt was fascinating, a glimpse into the violent origins that all civilized species had long since evolved past. One group of humans had managed to reach the facility's outer perimeter, led by what appeared to be one of their sergeants. Zextala focused her enhanced vision on the figure, noting the crude modifications to his standard-issue armor and the way the other humans deferred to his gestures. Human leadership structures were crude but effective, based on physical dominance and combat experience rather than the complex genetic hierarchies that govern more advanced species. The sergeant designation appeared to be Marcus Chun based on the identification beacon, was directing his squad with hand signals, using the mining equipment as cover while they advanced toward the main entrance. His movements showed a tactical awareness that was unusual for a Class 7 species, though still far below the level of true strategic thinking. Interesting, Zhuangxtala murmured to herself. Crix, pull up the personnel file on Human Auxiliary Designation Chun. Marcus. The data flowed across her visual interface moments later. Chun was 26 standard years old, born on one of the human breeding worlds, enlisted in auxiliary service at 18. His record showed 15 successful engagements, which was unusually high survival rate for human units. Most died within their first 3 missions. He had received minor commendations for tactical initiative and had been promoted to squad leader after his predecessor was killed in action. What struck Zhuangxtala as odd was a note in his psychological profile. Subject shows resistance to standard conditioning protocols. Maintains strong individual initiative. Recommend assignment to high-casualty operations to prevent contamination of more compliant units. She made a mental note to review the human conditioning programs after this campaign. If they were producing units capable of independent thought, it might be time to implement more stringent measures. The battle reached its crescendo as her forces converged on the mining facility. The rebels fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Victory was inevitable. It always was when the hegemony brought its full might to bear. Then, something went wrong. Zhuangxtala felt it before she saw it. A vibration through the ground that her sensitive feet detected immediately. The rebels had managed to overload one of the thermal generators, and the resulting explosion sent a shockwave racing through the canyon system. The carefully planned battle suddenly became chaos as the ground itself shifted and cracked. Her command post, positioned on what had seemed like a stable ridge, began to slide toward the canyon floor as the supporting rock gave way. Zhuangxtala leaped backward, her powerful legs carrying her clear of the immediate collapse, but she misjudged the extent of the damage. A second tremor sent her tumbling down the rocky slope, her armor scraping against stone as she fought to control her fall. She came to rest against an outcropping of crystal formation, momentarily stunned. Her armor's diagnostic systems immediately began reporting damage. Multiple stress fractures in the chest plates, compromised environmental seals, and, most critically, a failure in the primary power coupling that fed her life support systems. Zhuangxtala tried to stand and immediately felt the sharp pain of a cracked exoskeleton beneath her armor. Not fatal, but serious enough to impair her movement. She activated her emergency beacon and began running diagnostics on her equipment, trying to determine how long her backup power would last. The answer was not encouraging. 6 hours, maybe 8 if she minimized movement. More than enough time for rescue, assuming her forces could reach her position. But as she looked around, she realized she had fallen into a section of the canyon that was still contested territory. She could hear weapons fire echoing off the walls, and her tactical display showed rebel forces moving through the area. She was alone, injured, and potentially trapped behind enemy lines. Zhuangxtala checked her weapons. Her plasma rifle had been damaged in the fall, its focusing crystals cracked beyond field repair. Her sidearm was functional, but had limited ammunition. She could defend herself if necessary, but sustained combat was out of the question. She had just begun to consider her options when she heard footsteps approaching. Multiple individuals, moving with the careful caution of soldiers in hostile territory. Zhuangxtala pressed herself back against the crystal formation and tried to make herself as invisible as possible, though her size made true concealment nearly impossible. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices speaking in the crude human language. Zhuangxtala's translator implants parsed the words automatically. Sarge, this whole section is unstable. We should pull back and rejoin the main force. Negative. Intel says there might be hegemony command personnel in this area. We find them, we might get some useful information. And if we run into a Veltar combat unit, then we die. Same as always. Keep your eyes open. Zhuangxtala's blood chilled as she realized the voices belonged to rebel forces, and not just any rebels, but humans. The irony was not lost on her that she, a superior being capable of commanding entire star systems, was now hiding from representatives of the same species she had been using as disposable troops mere hours earlier. The humans came into view around the bend in the canyon, moving in a standard search formation. There were 4 of them, wearing the mismatched armor and equipment typical of rebel forces. What struck her immediately was how different they seemed from the auxiliary units under her command. These humans moved with purpose and intelligence, their weapons held with professional competence rather than the desperate aggression she was used to seeing. The one in the lead, a female with dark hair visible beneath her helmet, raised her hand to signal a halt. She had noticed something. "Wait," she said softly. "There's someone over there." Zwaigstala tensed, preparing for combat despite her injuries. But as the humans approached her position, weapons raised but not immediately firing, she found herself in an unprecedented situation. She had never been captured before. Veltar commanders were expected to die rather than be taken alive, but her injuries made fighting or escape impossible. The lead human rounded the crystal formation and stopped short when she saw Zwaigstala. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the human spoke. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like we caught ourselves a real prize." Zwaigstala raised her sidearm with her good arm, but the movement sent waves of pain through her damaged exoskeleton. The human could have shot her easily, but instead she held up her hand in a gesture of non-aggression. "Easy there. You're hurt pretty bad. That armor looks like it's seen better days." "I am Commander Zwaigstala of the Hegemony 3rd Fleet," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I demand to be treated according to the protocols of war." The human laughed, but not unkindly. "Lady, there haven't been any protocols of war for about 200 years. Your people made sure of that when they decided the rest of us weren't worth negotiating with." She gestured to her companions, who spread out to cover the approaches to their position. "But you're right about one thing, you're definitely a prize. The kind of intel we could get from a Hegemony fleet commander." She whistled low. "That could change the whole course of this war." Zwaigstala felt a moment of genuine fear. Torture was not uncommon among the rebel forces, and she had no illusions about what they might do to extract information from her. The Hegemony had captured rebels before, and their interrogation methods were thorough. But the human surprised her again. "That armor's leaking coolant," she observed, pointing to a steady drip from Zwaigstala's chest plate. "Your life support is failing. How long do you have?" Zwaigstala hesitated. Revealing weakness to an enemy went against every instinct she possessed. But the human seemed genuinely concerned, which was unexpected. 6 hours, she admitted. "Perhaps 8 if I remain immobile." The human nodded thoughtfully. "Not enough time to get you back to our base for a proper interrogation. And honestly, I'm not sure our medical facilities could handle someone your size anyway." She looked Zwaigstala up and down, taking an alien physiology with professional interest. "What do you need? To fix the armor, I mean." This was definitely not proceeding according to any scenario Zwaigstala had been trained for. The power coupling needs to be realigned, and the environmental seals require." "Why are you asking this?" "Because," the human said matter-of-factly, "you're no good to us dead. And despite what your people seem to think, we're not monsters. We don't let prisoners die from equipment failure if we can help it." She turned to one of her companions. "Rodriguez, you still got that field repair kit?" A younger male human nodded and unslung a battered toolkit from his belt. "Yeah, but I don't know anything about Veltar armor systems." "That's okay. She'll have to walk us through it." The lead human looked back at Zwaigstala. "You help us fix your armor, we make sure you survive long enough to be properly interrogated." "Fair deal." Zwaigstala stared at her in amazement. "You would trust me to guide you through repairing my own life support systems?" "Why wouldn't we? It's not like you're going to tell us to do something that'll kill you. And even if you try to trick us into making your armor into a bomb or something, we're all standing right here with you." Not exactly a winning strategy. The logic was simple, practical, and completely alien to everything Zwaigstala had been taught about inferior species. Humans were supposed to be driven by emotion and primitive instincts. They weren't supposed to be capable of this kind of rational thinking. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Why would you care whether I live or die? I am your enemy." The human looked at her with an expression that might have been pity. Lady, just because we're on opposite sides of this war doesn't mean I want to watch you suffocate in your own armor. That's not war. That's just cruelty. She gestured for Rodriguez to approach. Now, are you going to help us help you? Or are we going to stand here and watch your life support fail while we debate philosophy? For the first time in her life, Commander Zaxtala found herself completely out of her depth. These humans were not behaving according to any pattern she understood. They should have been demanding information, threatening her, or simply executing her on the spot. Instead, they were offering to repair her armor based on nothing more than her word that she would cooperate. It was impossible. It was irrational. And yet, as she looked into the lead human's eyes, she saw something that she had never expected to find in a member of a class, 7 species. She saw genuine compassion. Very well, she said finally. The primary coupling is located beneath the central chest plate. You will need to remove the outer panels first. As Rodriguez began carefully working on her armor under her direction, Zaxtala found herself studying the humans around her with new eyes. They moved with competence and professionalism that seemed far beyond what she had been taught to expect from their species. More than that, they treated her with a respect that she had rarely received even from other hegemony officers. For the first time in her life, Commander Zaxtala began to wonder if everything she had been told about humans might be wrong. And if that was true, then what else had the hegemony been lying to her about? The repair process took nearly 2 hours, and during that time, Zaxtala learned more about humans than she had in her entire military career. Rodriguez worked with careful precision, following her instructions exactly while asking intelligent questions about the armor systems. His understanding of basic engineering principles was far more sophisticated than any Class 7 species should have possessed. But it was the conversation that truly unsettled her. "So how long have you been fighting this war?" asked the leader, who had introduced herself as Captain Sarah Chun, though she bore no resemblance to the human auxiliary Marcus Chun that Zaxtala had observed earlier in the battle. "I have been in military service for 12 standard years," Zaxtala replied, watching Rodriguez adjust a delicate power coupling. "But the hegemony has been maintaining order in this sector for over 2 centuries. "Maintaining order," Sarah repeated with a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it? Funny, we call it something else entirely. The hegemony brings civilization to primitive worlds," Zaxtala said, reciting the doctrine she had learned as a child. "We provide structure, technology, and guidance to species that would otherwise destroy themselves through warfare and ignorance." "Like Earth?" asked another human, an older male with graying hair who had been introduced as Sergeant Williams. Zaxtala paused. Earth was a special case, one that had always been classified in her briefings. Earth was different. Your species was too primitive for standard uplift protocols. You were given the opportunity to serve the greater galactic community in the capacity you were best suited for. As slaves, you mean? As auxiliary forces, Zaxtala corrected. Every species contributes according to their abilities. The Veltar provide leadership and strategic thinking. The Kaith provide technical expertise. Humans provide martial enthusiasm. Sarah's expression hardened. Martial enthusiasm. That's a nice way of saying we're disposable. All soldiers are expendable to some degree, Zaxtala replied, though she found herself somewhat uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The difference is that some are more valuable than others. "Power coupling is aligned," Rodriguez announced, interrupting the tense exchange. "Environmental seals look good. Your life support should be stable now." Zaxtala checked her armor's diagnostic display and was surprised to find that the repair work was flawless. Rodriguez had not only fixed the immediate problems, but had actually improved several systems beyond their original specifications. "Ow," she asked, staring at the diagnostic readout. "Your modifications have increased power efficiency by 12%. That should be impossible with field equipment." Rodriguez shrugged. "I used to work on mining equipment before the war. Similar principles, just different scale. Your armor's not that different from an environmental suit when you get down to the basic systems. But the technical manuals for Veltar military equipment are classified at the highest levels. How could you possibly understand the operating principles?" "I don't need to understand the operating principles," Rodriguez explained patiently. "I just need to understand how electricity flows through circuits and how pressure differentials work in sealed systems. Physics is physics, no matter what species built the equipment. Thala stared at him. The casual way he had just dismissed technology that represented centuries of Veltar engineering advancement was both impressive and terrifying. You learned this through trial and error? Mostly. Though Sarah here used to be an engineer before she joined the rebellion. She taught me a lot about advanced systems integration. Thala turned to look at Sarah with new eyes. You were an engineer? But humans don't have the neural architecture for advanced technical disciplines. Sarah's smile was cold. According to who? Your classification reports? The same reports that say we're barely sentient. According to 300 years of scientific study, Thala replied, though she was beginning to feel less certain about everything she thought she knew. Lady, those studies were conducted on humans who had been kept isolated on agricultural worlds for generations, with no access to education or technology beyond basic farming equipment. Of course, they seemed primitive. You made sure they stayed that way. Sarah gestured around the canyon where the battle still raged in the distance. But some of us got away. Some of us made it to worlds where we could learn, where we could develop our potential. And what we learned was that your 300 years of scientific study was complete bullshit. That's impossible, Thala said automatically. The hegemony's xenobiological research is the most advanced in the galaxy. Our scientists, your scientists, Williams interrupted, told you what your government wanted them to tell you. Has it ever occurred to you that maybe the hegemony has been lying about human capabilities because the truth would be inconvenient? Thala felt a chill that had nothing to do with her damaged armor. What truth? Sarah and Williams exchanged a look that spoke of shared knowledge and shared pain. The truth, Sarah said quietly, is that humans aren't Class 7 at all. We never were. She reached up and began unfastening the seals on her helmet, and Thala watched with growing confusion. Human physiology was well documented. They were oxygen breathers like most Class 7 species, with primitive sensory systems and limited cognitive capacity. The helmet came free with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, and Sarah shook out her dark hair. She looked exactly as Thala expected, a typical human female, unremarkable in every way except for her eyes. Thala had seen human eyes before in the documentation about auxiliary forces. They were supposed to be simple optical organs, capable of detecting light and basic movement, but lacking the sophisticated adaptations that marked truly evolved species. But Sarah's eyes were different. They held an intelligence that was unmistakably present, unmistakably aware. More than that, they held something that Thala had only ever seen in the eyes of other Veltar officers. The look of someone accustomed to command, to making complex decisions under pressure. You're staring, Sarah observed with amusement. Your eyes, Thala said slowly. They're not what I expected. What did you expect? Something more primitive. Sarah laughed, but there was pain behind it. 300 years ago, when your people first found Earth, humans had already developed nuclear weapons, spaceflight, and global communication networks. We had art, literature, philosophy, and science. We had built civilizations that spanned continents and created works of beauty that your people destroyed without a second thought. She began walking toward the edge of the crystal formation, and Thala found herself following despite her injuries. But that didn't fit the narrative your empire needed, Sarah continued. You couldn't just conquer a species that was obviously intelligent and rapidly advancing. That would have made you the bad guys, wouldn't it? So instead, you created a fiction. What fiction? That we were primitives, that we needed guidance, that we were too stupid and violent to be trusted with real technology or real responsibilities. Sarah's voice grew harder with each word. You took our children and raised them in isolation, fed them just enough education to follow orders, but not enough to think critically. You bred us like animals, and then pointed to the results as proof that we were animals. Thala felt her world shifting beneath her feet. That's not. The classification systems are based on objective criteria. Cognitive capacity, technological advancement, social organization, all measured by beings who had a vested interest in finding us wanting, Williams said, joining the conversation. Tell me something, Commander. In all your years of service, How many humans have you actually talked to? Really talked to? Not just given orders? ZYXDALA thought about it. The answer was disturbing. The auxiliary forces receive their orders through the chain of command. Direct communication is rarely necessary. And the humans who work in hegemony facilities, the ones who maintain your equipment and clean your buildings, they're supervised by Kaith overseers. I have no direct contact with manual laborers. So everything you know about human capabilities comes from official reports and observations of humans who were specifically selected and conditioned to appear primitive, Sarah said. You've never actually met a free human before today. The implications hit ZYXDALA like a physical blow. If what they were saying was true, if humans had been deliberately suppressed and misrepresented, then everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization was wrong. Even if this is true, she said slowly, it changes nothing. The hegemony maintains order across thousands of worlds. Without central authority, there would be chaos. You mean without Veltar authority, Rodriguez said. He had finished packing his tools and was now listening to the conversation with obvious interest. Because from where we sit, it looks like the hegemony creates chaos wherever it goes. That's absurd. The Veltar brought peace to the galaxy. The Veltar brought subjugation to the galaxy, Sarah corrected. There's a difference. Peace means different species working together as equals. What you have is a pyramid scheme where one species sits on top and everyone else serves them. ZYXDALA's mandibles clicked in agitation. The Veltar earned their position through genetic superiority and proven leadership ability. We are naturally suited for command roles. Says who? Your own scientists? The same ones who classified humans as barely sentient. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. ZYXDALA found herself unable to answer it, because the logical chain was inescapable. If the hegemony had lied about human capabilities, then what else had they lied about? And if they had lied about the fundamental basis for their authority? I need to see proof, she said finally. These are serious accusations. If you expect me to believe them, you need to provide evidence. Sarah nodded. Fair enough. Rodriguez, show her the tablet. Rodriguez pulled out a small device that looked like standard hegemony technology, but had been modified with additional components. This is a quantum processing unit, he explained, activating the device. Standard hegemony tech, rated for class 3 sentient operation or higher. He handed it to ZYXDALA, who examined it with growing confusion. The quantum interface was definitely designed for advanced cognitive use, the kind of complex, multidimensional thinking that was supposed to be beyond human capabilities. This is Veltar technology, she said. How did you acquire it? I built it, Rodriguez said simply. ZYXDALA stared at him. That's impossible. Humans lack the neural architecture for quantum computing interfaces. You can't process the multidimensional mathematics required for. She stopped speaking as the tablet activated under her touch, displaying a complex technical schematic that made her heart race. It was a complete engineering diagram for a hegemony battlecruiser, down to the quantum resonance frequencies of the shield generators. Ow, she whispered. Same way we fix your armor, Sarah said. Turns out human brains are a lot more adaptable than your scientists claimed. We can't interface directly with quantum systems like the Veltar can, but we can build interfaces that let us work around that limitation. She pointed to additional components on the tablet. Those are neural bridge processors. Rodriguez designed them himself. They translate human thought patterns into quantum mathematics and back again. It's not as elegant as your natural abilities, but it gets the job done. ZYXDALA looked up from the tablet to find all 4 humans watching her with expressions she was finally beginning to recognize. They weren't the blank, accepting faces she was used to seeing on auxiliary troops. These were the faces of individuals, thinking, feeling, creative beings who were capable of complex reasoning and emotional depth. The battle cruiser schematics, she said slowly. Where did you get them? We took them from Hegemony Data Core during a raid on a supply depot, Williams explained. But that's not the impressive part. The impressive part is what Rodriguez did with them. I don't understand. Rodriguez smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness she had seen from any of them. I improved the design. The power efficiency calculations were all wrong, and the shield harmonics were generating massive energy waste. I fixed those problems, and increased overall combat effectiveness by about 30%. Zyaxthala felt dizzy. She looked at the tablet again, running her enhanced vision across the modifications Rodriguez had made to the original design. They were brilliant, elegant solutions to problems that Veltar engineers have been struggling with for decades. This is Class 2 level work, she said numbly. Advanced engineering requiring sophisticated understanding of quantum mechanics and dimensional mathematics. Humans are not supposed to be capable of this. Lady, Sarah said gently, humans are capable of a lot more than your people want to admit. The question you need to ask yourself is, why don't they want to admit it? Zyaxthala closed her eyes and tried to process what she was learning. If humans were truly capable of this level of technical sophistication, then their classification as Class 7 was not just wrong, it was deliberately falsified. And if it was deliberately falsified, then someone in the hegemony hierarchy had made a conscious decision to suppress an entire species. But why? What purpose could such a massive deception serve? The answer, when it came to her, was so simple and so terrible that she almost couldn't accept it. Control. If humans were acknowledged as an intelligent species capable of advanced technical work, they would have to be treated as equals under galactic law. They would be entitled to representation in the Hegemony Council, to protection under the Sentient Rights Accord, to all the privileges and protections afforded to truly sapient beings. Instead, by classifying them as Class 7, the hegemony had been able to use them as slave labor for 3 centuries. Billions of humans had lived and died in service to an empire that refused to acknowledge their basic personhood. How many? She asked quietly. How many what? Sarah replied. How many humans know about their true capabilities? Sarah's expression grew sad. Not enough. Most of the humans in hegemony space have been conditioned for generations to believe the lies about themselves. They genuinely think they're inferior, that they're lucky to be allowed to serve. Breaking that conditioning, it's not easy, but some have broken free. Some, usually when they're exposed to other free species who treat them as equals. The rebellion has humans working alongside Keth engineers, Zephyrian philosophers, even a few Veltar defectors who figured out the truth. Zyaxthala's eyes widened. Veltar defectors? Not many, Williams admitted. But some of your people have consciences. When they realized what the Empire was really doing, they couldn't stomach it anymore. I want to meet them, Zyaxthala said suddenly. The humans exchanged surprised looks. Why? Sarah asked. Zyaxthala struggled to find the words. Everything she had believed about herself, about her species, about the natural order of the galaxy was crumbling around her. She needed to understand how deep the deception went, and she needed to hear the truth from someone she could trust. Because, she said finally, if what you're telling me is true, then I have been complicit in one of the greatest crimes in galactic history. And I need to know what I can do to make it right. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but first, we need to get out of this canyon. The battle's moving this way, and I'd rather not get caught in the crossfire. As they prepared to move, Zyaxthala found herself looking at her captors with completely new eyes. They weren't primitives, or animals, or disposable soldiers. They were people, intelligent, capable, creative people who had been systematically oppressed and dehumanized by her government. And somehow, despite everything that had been done to them, they had still shown her compassion when she was helpless and injured. For the first time in her life, Commander Zyaxthala began to understand what true honor really meant. The journey through the canyon system took 3 hours, and every step challenged another assumption Zyaxthala had held about human capabilities. Sarah's team moved with military precision that would have impressed even Veltar special forces, using hand signals and tactical formations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of battlefield dynamics. More disturbing still was their equipment. What she had initially dismissed as crude, rebel modifications turned out to be ingenious improvements on standard hegemony technology. Their weapons had been reconfigured for better accuracy and power efficiency. Their armor incorporated materials she didn't recognize, providing protection levels that should have been impossible with their resources. Where did you learn military tactics? She asked Sarah as they paused behind a cluster of crystal formations to avoid a hegemony patrol. Same place you did, Sarah replied quietly. checking her scanner for enemy positions. Military Academy. ZYX-Thala's 4 eyes widened in shock. That's impossible. Human auxiliaries receive basic training only. Advanced tactical instruction is restricted to Class 3 species and above. Not Hegemony Military Academy, Sarah clarified. Free World's Academy on Kepler 186F. We've been building our own institutions for the past 50 years. She gestured for the team to move forward as the patrol passed out of range. Turns out when you give humans access to real education and training, they excel at military science. Who would have thought? The sarcasm in her voice was sharp enough to cut, but ZYX-Thala was too focused on the implications to take offense. You have an entire military academy? With human instructors? Human, Keth, Zephyrian, and, yes, even some Veltar defectors. Turns out knowledge isn't actually species-specific when you get down to the fundamentals. They reached the edge of the canyon system as the local sun began to set, painting the rocky landscape in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, ZYX-Thala could see lights from what appeared to be a significant installation, too large to be a simple rebel base. "What is that?" she asked. "Freedom Station," Rodriguez replied with obvious pride. "Our primary research and manufacturing facility for this sector." ZYX-Thala stared at the installation with growing amazement. It was clearly a major operation, with multiple buildings, defensive installations, and what appeared to be a functioning spaceport. Ships were coming and going in a pattern that suggested organized logistics rather than the desperate improvisation she expected from rebel forces. "How many people live there?" "About 50,000, Sarah said. Mostly refugees from hegemony worlds, but also scientists, engineers, and military personnel from across the Free World Alliance." 50,000? ZYX-Thala's voice cracked slightly. She had been told that the entire rebellion consisted of a few thousand desperate terrorists hiding in asteroid fields and abandoned worlds. Intelligence reports estimated the total rebel population at less than 10,000 across all sectors. Williams laughed bitterly. "Your intelligence is about as accurate as your xenobiology. We've got over 6 million people in this sector alone, and we're just one of 12 active rebellion zones." The numbers hit ZYX-Thala like a physical blow. If the rebels had that kind of population base, with dedicated manufacturing and research facilities, then they weren't a minor insurgency that could be crushed through superior firepower. They were a legitimate rival civilization. "How?" she asked. "How could the hegemony not know about installations this size?" "Because your people see what they want to see," Sarah explained as they began the descent toward Freedom Station. "Every ship that visits here is registered as a mining vessel or cargo hauler. Every communication is routed through encrypted civilian channels. Your surveillance systems are looking for military signatures, so we make sure they don't find any. But the power output alone should be detectable from orbit, masked by the planet's natural geothermal activity." Rodriguez designed a system that makes our energy signature look like volcanic emissions. ZYX-Thala looked at the young human engineer with new respect. "You camouflage an entire city using false geological data?" "It wasn't that hard once I understood how your sensors work," Rodriguez replied modestly. "Most hegemony technology assumes the people being monitored are too primitive to understand how the monitoring works. When you know what the sensors are looking for, it's pretty easy to feed them false information." As they approached the station's perimeter, ZYX-Thala was surprised to see the security arrangements. Instead of the crude checkpoints she expected, there were sophisticated scanning systems that rivaled anything in hegemony space. The guards were alert and professional, carrying weapons that looked both familiar and wrong, clearly based on hegemony designs, but modified in ways she couldn't immediately identify. "Hold here," Sarah instructed as they reached the main gate. She approached the guard post alone, engaging in a brief conversation with the security personnel before returning to the group. "There's going to be a bit of a commotion when we go in," she warned. "Most of the people here have never seen a live Veltar up close, and definitely not a fleet commander. Try not to take it personally if people stare." ZYX-Thala nodded, though she found herself more nervous than she expected. Throughout her career, she had been accustomed to inspiring fear and respect wherever she went. The idea of being an object of curiosity was unsettling. The gates opened, and they entered Freedom Station. The first thing that struck HFY was the diversity. She had never seen so many different species working together in one place. Humans walked alongside Keth engineers, their conversation clearly collaborative rather than hierarchical. A group of Zephyrian philosophers was engaged in what appeared to be a friendly debate with human scholars, their different physiologies and communication styles creating a complex but functional dynamic. Most shocking of all, she spotted 3 figures in the distance wearing modified Veltar military uniforms, the defectors Sarah had mentioned. "This is impossible," she murmured. The species integration protocols alone should make this level of cooperation unworkable. The communication barriers, the cultural differences, the biological incompatibilities. "Funny thing about those protocols," Sarah said, "they work a lot better when they're based on mutual respect instead of assumed hierarchy." As they walked through the station's main thoroughfare, HFY began to notice details that challenged everything she thought she knew about interspecies relations. Humans and Keth were working together on what appeared to be advanced technical projects, their different cognitive styles complementing rather than conflicting with each other. Zephyrians and humans were engaged in philosophical discussions that seemed to benefit both species' understanding. Most remarkably, she saw a Veltar engineer explaining something to a human technician, treating him as an equal colleague rather than a subordinate. "How long has the station been operational?" she asked. 15 years, Williams replied. "Started as a small mining outpost and grew from there. Turns out when you let people work together without artificial barriers, they accomplish remarkable things." They paused outside a large building marked as the Central Research Facility, and Sarah turned to address Exthala directly. "Before we go in," she said, "I need to know something. Are you genuinely interested in learning the truth, or are you just gathering intelligence for the hegemony?" The question caught HFY off guard. She had been so focused on processing the revelations about human capabilities that she hadn't really considered her own motivations. I'm not sure," she admitted. "Everything I thought I knew has been proven wrong in the space of a few hours. I don't even know what the truth is anymore." Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's honest, at least. Come on, there's someone you need to meet." They entered the research facility, passing through corridors lined with laboratories and workshop spaces. HFY could see humans and Keth working on projects that would have been classified as impossible just hours earlier. Quantum computers designed by human engineers, biomedical research conducted jointly between species, even what appeared to be theoretical physics discussions between Zephyrian philosophers and human scientists. Sarah led them to a large conference room where a single figure waited, a Veltar female wearing a modified uniform that HFY recognized as belonging to the Hegemony Scientific Corps. "Commander Vextala," Sarah said formally, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Kexlana, formerly chief xenobiologist for the 3rd Scientific Fleet." HFY stared at her fellow Veltar in shock. Kexlana was a legend in Hegemony scientific circles, one of the most respected researchers in the Empire, credited with major discoveries in interspecies biology and genetics. Her defection would have been a massive blow to Hegemony research programs. "Dr. Kexlana," HFY said formally, "I was told you died in a transport accident 2 years ago." Kexlana's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "That was the cover story, yes. The truth is that I discovered something the High Command preferred to keep hidden, which was the true nature of human genetics." Kexlana activated a holographic display that filled the room with complex biological data. "I was investigating anomalies in human brain development when I made a discovery that changed everything I thought I knew about our empire." The hologram showed comparative brain scans from multiple species, Veltar, Keth, Zephyrian, and human. To HFY's shock, the human brain patterns showed complexity levels that rivaled or exceeded the other species. "This is impossible," she said automatically. "Human neural density is well below the threshold for advanced cognitive function." "That's what we thought," Kexlana agreed. "But I discovered that we had been measuring the wrong things. Human brains don't work like ours. They're organized differently, with higher plasticity and more complex interconnections. When you test them using appropriate metrics, they score consistently in the Class 2 range, with some individuals reaching Class 1 levels. But the classification studies were deliberately designed to hide human capabilities Kexlana interrupted. The tests used cognitive models based on Veltar brain structure. It's like testing a fish for intelligence by asking it to climb a tree. She manipulated the display to show historical data. When I went back through 3 centuries of research, I found consistent evidence that human cognitive abilities have been systematically underestimated. Not by accident, by design. ZYXThala felt sick. You're saying the entire classification system is fraudulent? For humans, yes. And probably for several other species as well. I began investigating Keth intelligence metrics and found similar patterns of deliberate underestimation. The implications were staggering. If multiple species had been misclassified to justify their subjugation, then the entire basis of hegemony authority was built on lies. Why? ZYXThala asked. What purpose does this serve? Control, Kexlana said simply. The hegemony's power structure depends on maintaining the fiction that Veltar are naturally superior to other species. If that fiction is exposed, the entire system collapses. She changed the display to show population statistics. Do you know how many humans there are in the galaxy, Commander? ZYXThala thought about the official figures. Approximately 2 billion spread across 43 agricultural worlds. The real number is closer to 50 billion, spread across over 200 worlds. And that's just the ones we know about. The room seemed to spin around ZYXThala. 50 billion. Humans breed faster and adapt more quickly than any other species we've encountered. In 300 years, they've become one of the largest populations in the galaxy. The only reason the hegemony can control them is by keeping them ignorant of their own capabilities. Kexlana manipulated the display again, showing projections of human population growth and technological development. If humans were given full access to education and technology, they would develop into a major galactic power within 50 years. Their natural creativity and adaptability would make them formidable competitors in every field from science to warfare. So instead, the hegemony keeps them as slaves, ZYXThala said, the full horror of the situation finally sinking in. Not just slaves, Kexlana corrected. Cannon fodder. Did you know that human auxiliary forces have a 93% casualty rate? That's not an accident, it's policy. The hegemony deliberately uses humans in high-casualty operations to prevent their population from growing too large. ZYXThala thought about all the human auxiliary units she had commanded over the years. Thousands of soldiers sent into hopeless situations with inadequate equipment and minimal support. She had always told herself it was necessary, that their sacrifice served the greater good of galactic civilization. Now she realized she had been participating in genocide. How many Veltar know? She asked quietly. More than you might think, Kexlana replied. But most choose to ignore the evidence because confronting it would mean admitting that our entire civilization is built on a lie. And the High Command? They know. They've always known. The human classification was decided at the highest levels of government 300 years ago, and it's been maintained through a combination of propaganda, selective data, and outright deception ever since. ZYXThala closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what she was learning. Her entire worldview was collapsing, but underneath the shock and horror, she felt something else growing, anger. She had been lied to. Her species had been lied to. And billions of humans had suffered and died because of those lies. What can I do? She asked. Kexlana and Sarah exchanged glances. That depends, Sarah said carefully. Are you asking as a hegemony commander gathering intelligence, or as someone who wants to help us expose the truth? ZYXThala looked around the room, at the evidence of human intelligence displayed on the walls, at the Veltar scientist who had sacrificed her career to reveal the truth, at the humans who had shown her more honor and compassion than she had ever received from her own people. I'm asking, she said slowly, as someone who just realized that everything I thought I was fighting for was wrong. For the first time since her capture, Sarah smiled. In that case, Commander, we have a lot of work to do. The War Council meeting that evening included representatives from 12 different species and for rebel sectors, all connected through quantum encrypted communication links that Rodriguez had somehow made completely undetectable to hegemony surveillance systems. ZYXThala found herself seated at the table not as a prisoner, but as a potential ally whose knowledge of hegemony military operations could prove invaluable. The scope of the rebellion was even larger than she had imagined. General Marcus Chun, who turned out to be Sarah's brother and the same human auxiliary she had observed during the battle, commanded rebel forces across 6 star systems. Dr. Yithkala, a Keth scientist who had defected from the Hegemony Technology Corps, had developed manufacturing systems that allowed rebel forces to produce equipment that rivaled or exceeded hegemony standards. Most shocking of all, Admiral Zorthex, a Veltar fleet commander she had known personally, had been secretly feeding intelligence to the rebellion for over 5 years. The hegemony's control is far more fragile than they want to admit, Admiral Zorthex explained as he briefed the assembled commanders on recent operations. Their power depends entirely on maintaining the illusion that resistance is hopeless. When people realize that's not true, their support evaporates quickly. He gestured to a holographic display showing recent recruitment statistics. In the past year alone, we've had over 3 million new refugees from hegemony space. Entire colonies are requesting evacuation assistance. The facade is cracking. What changed? ZYXThala asked. Why are people leaving now when they accepted hegemony rule for centuries? Information, said Dr. Yithkala, her insectoid features clicking with satisfaction. We've been conducting a systematic campaign to reveal the truth about the classification system. When people learn that their natural inferiority is manufactured propaganda, they stop accepting their subjugation. She activated another display showing communication networks that span dozens of star systems. We've established education programs on over 200 worlds, all disguised as agricultural or technical training. We're teaching people their real history, their true capabilities, and, most importantly, that they have choices. ZYXThala studied the network diagrams with growing amazement. The rebellion wasn't just a military operation. It was a comprehensive effort to rebuild galactic civilization on entirely different principles. How are you avoiding detection? She asked. Operations this large should be impossible to hide from hegemony intelligence. General Chun smiled grimly. Because hegemony intelligence is designed to monitor threats from other advanced civilizations. They're looking for Class 1 and Class 2 species building fleets and staging military operations. They don't look for Class 7 species developing education programs or Class 4 species conducting philosophical discussions. In other words, Sarah added, their own prejudices have become their blind spots. They're so convinced that inferior species are incapable of sophisticated organization that they ignore evidence of exactly that kind of organization. The meeting continued for several hours, with different commanders reporting on operations across the galaxy. ZYXThala listened in growing fascination as a picture emerged of a shadow civilization that existed alongside and, within the hegemony, a network of free worlds, hidden research facilities, and secret education programs that was quietly undermining the empire from within. But what struck her most powerfully was the relationship dynamics between the different species represented at the table. There is no hierarchy based on assumed genetic superiority, no automatic deference to particular species or individuals. Decisions were made through discussion and consensus, with each representative contributing according to their knowledge and expertise rather than their classification level. It was everything the hegemony claimed to be, but had never actually achieved. Commander ZYXThala, Admiral Zorthex said during a break in the briefings, "You've been very quiet. What are your thoughts on what you've learned today?" All eyes turned to her, and ZYXThala found herself in the unprecedented position of having her opinion genuinely solicited by representatives of species she had always considered inferior. "I'm trying to process the implications," she admitted. "If everything you've shown me is true, then the hegemony's entire governing philosophy is based on deliberate falsification of scientific evidence. The social, political, and military consequences of that revelation would be revolutionary," Dr. Kexlana finished, "which is why the High Command will do anything to prevent this information from becoming widely known. They're already escalating their suppression efforts," General Chen reported. "We've received intelligence that the hegemony is planning something called Operation Genetic Purity, a systematic elimination of human populations that show signs of advanced development." ZYXThala felt her blood freeze. elimination, mass sterilization programs, forced relocations to isolation worlds, and, in some cases, outright extermination, Admiral Zorthex said grimly. The High Command has apparently decided that the risk of human development outweighs their value as auxiliary forces. When ZYXDALA asked, "The operation is scheduled to begin in 6 months," Sarah replied, "starting with worlds that have shown signs of independent technological development." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The hegemony was preparing to commit genocide on a scale unprecedented in galactic history. The systematic elimination of entire populations whose only crime was beginning to realize their own potential. "We have to stop them," ZYXDALA said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "We intend to," General Chen replied. "But we need more than good intentions. We need actionable intelligence about hegemony military deployments, communication codes, and operational plans." All eyes turned back to ZYXDALA, and she suddenly understood why she had been brought to this meeting. They weren't just offering to show her the truth. They were asking her to choose sides in a war that would determine the future of galactic civilization. "What you're asking me to do is treason," she said slowly. "What we're asking you to do," Sarah corrected, "is choose between your loyalty to an empire built on lies and your responsibility to prevent genocide. If I provide you with hegemony military intelligence, thousands of my fellow officers will die in the operations you conduct against them. And if you don't," Admiral Zorthex said quietly, "billions of innocent people will die in Operation Genetic Purity." ZYXDALA closed her eyes and tried to think through the moral calculus. She had sworn an oath to serve the hegemony and protect its citizens. But if the hegemony itself was engaged in crimes against sapient beings, did that oath still hold meaning? More than that, she thought about the human soldiers she had commanded over the years. Thousands of brave individuals who had died following her orders, believing they were serving a greater good. If they had been deliberately sacrificed as part of a genocidal policy, then she bore responsibility for their deaths. "I need guarantees," she said finally. "If I provide intelligence to the rebellion, I want assurances that it will be used to minimize casualties on both sides. The goal should be to end this war, not perpetuate it." "Agreed," General Chun said immediately. "Our objective has always been liberation, not conquest. We want to build a galaxy where all species can develop their potential freely, not create a new empire with different masters. And I want to review all operations that use my intelligence before they're implemented. I won't be responsible for unnecessary death and destruction." "Also agreed," Sarah nodded. "You'll be a full partner in planning any operations that use information you provide." ZYXDALA looked around the table one more time, studying the faces of beings she had been trained to consider inferior. What she saw was intelligence, determination, and genuine commitment to principles that the hegemony claimed to uphold but had abandoned long ago. "Very well," she said. "What do you need to know?" The rest of the meeting focused on specific intelligence requirements. ZYXDALA provided detailed information about hegemony fleet deployments, communication protocols, and operational procedures. More importantly, she was able to confirm several assumptions the rebels had made about hegemony strategic planning and identify weaknesses in their defensive postures. By the time the meeting ended, the rebels had enough information to plan a series of operations that could significantly disrupt Operation Genetic Purity while minimizing casualties among hegemony forces. As the various commanders signed off from their secure connections, Sarah approached ZYXDALA with an expression that mixed gratitude with concern. "That was incredibly brave," she said. "But you realize there's no going back now. Once the hegemony discovers you've defected, you'll be marked for execution." "I know," ZYXDALA replied. "But I've been thinking about something Dr. Kexlana said earlier, that confronting the truth about our empire means admitting that our entire civilization is built on lies. Maybe it's time for that admission, even if it means destroying everything you once believed in." ZYXDALA thought about her life before her capture. The certainty of genetic superiority, the pride in Veltar achievements, the satisfaction of maintaining order throughout the galaxy. All of it had been revealed as hollow propaganda designed to justify the systematic oppression of other species. "What I believed in was already destroyed," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." Sarah smiled sadly. "I understand that feeling. When I first learned the truth about human capabilities, I spent weeks in denial. It's easier to believe lies than to confront how wrong you've been about everything. How did you overcome it? By focusing on what I could build instead of what I had lost. The truth is painful, but it's also liberating. For the first time in my life, I get to work towards something that's genuinely worth fighting for. Zawaiksdala nodded, beginning to understand. She had spent her entire career maintaining an empire built on oppression and deception. Now, she had the opportunity to help build something better, a galactic civilization based on actual equality and mutual respect. It wouldn't be easy. The hegemony would fight desperately to maintain their power, and the transition to a free galaxy would require massive social and political changes. But for the first time in her life, Zawaiksdala felt like she was working towards something that deserved her loyalty. "What happens next?" she asked. "Next," Sarah said, "we introduce you to the rest of the rebellion. There are people across the galaxy who need to hear your story. Veltar officers who are beginning to question their orders, hegemony scientists who are discovering inconsistencies in their data, even high command officials who are starting to realize that their policies are unsustainable. You think they'll listen to me? I think they'll listen to a Veltar fleet commander who is willing to admit she was wrong and change sides. Your defection will prove to thousands of other people that changing their minds is possible." Zawaiksdala considered the magnitude of what they were asking. She wouldn't just be providing intelligence. She would become a symbol of the possibility for redemption and change within the hegemony itself. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "We want to offer you a formal position in the rebellion. General Chun has proposed creating a new unit, former hegemony military personnel who want to help transition the galaxy toward freedom. You could command that unit, leading former hegemony officers against the hegemony itself, leading former hegemony officers toward a better understanding of what military service should mean, protecting sapient beings instead of oppressing them, building peace instead of maintaining dominance." Zawaiksdala thought about all the human soldiers who had died under her command, believing they were serving something greater than themselves. She thought about the billions of humans and other species currently suffering under hegemony rule. And she thought about the possibility of actually achieving the ideals that had originally motivated her to join the military. "I accept," she said, as they shook hands, an awkward gesture given their very different anatomies. But symbolically important, Zawaiksdala realized that her capture by human rebels had become the most important moment of her life. She had lost an empire built on lies, but she had gained something far more valuable, the chance to help build a galaxy based on truth. 6 months later, Zawaiksdala stood on the bridge of the FSS Liberation, watching as the combined fleet of the Free World Alliance emerged from hyperspace around the hegemony capital world of Veltaran Prime. The massive armada represented the culmination of everything the rebellion had been building toward, not just a military victory, but the chance to expose the truth about the hegemony to the entire galaxy. The liberation herself was a testament to what could be achieved when different species work together as equals. Originally a hegemony battlecruiser, she had been captured and extensively modified using technologies developed by human engineers, Keth scientists, and Zephyrian theorists working in collaboration. The result was a ship that outperformed anything in the hegemony fleet while requiring a fraction of the crew and resources. "All vessels report ready for operation," announced Commander Sarah Chun from her position at the tactical console. Her promotion to Fleet Operations Commander had been one of many changes in the rebellion structure as they prepared for this final confrontation. Transmission from Admiral Zorthex. Reported communications Officer Rodriguez, now wearing the insignia of a senior technical specialist. The diversionary attacks at Kethura and Zephyr have drawn off approximately 60% of the hegemony's mobile fleet assets. Veltaran Prime is defended by 47 capital ships and approximately 200 patrol vessels. Zawaiksdala nodded, studying the tactical display. Under normal circumstances, those numbers would represent an insurmountable defensive advantage. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the hegemony was about to discover that their military superiority was as much of an illusion as their genetic supremacy. "Status of Operation Revelation?" she asked. "Broadcasting stations are in position throughout hegemony space," Sarah reported. "DR. Kexlana confirms that the evidence packages are ready for simultaneous transmission on all civilian communication channels. And our contact within the High Command, Minister Velderan, confirms that he's prepared to address the Hegemony Council once we begin the broadcast. Admiral Zorthex replied through the communication link. He's bringing 53 other government officials who are ready to support our evidence with their own testimony. Zyxthala allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Minister Velderan had been one of the architects of the human classification system 3 centuries ago, and his willingness to confess the truth would carry enormous weight with the hegemony population. Enemy fleet is moving to intercept, reported the sensor operator, a young Keth engineer named Tixera who had proven remarkably gifted at reading hegemony tactical patterns. Let them come, the Zyxthala replied. All vessels, implement Plan Omega. Remember, our objective is not to destroy the hegemony fleet. It's to disable their ability to prevent the truth from reaching their population. The battle began with a coordinated strike against the hegemony's communication satellites and data relay stations. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet directly, the Free World Alliance used their superior speed and maneuverability to bypass the capital ships and target the infrastructure that allowed the hegemony to control information flow throughout their empire. Within the first hour, they had successfully disabled 80% of the communication networks that the hegemony used to maintain centralized control over their worlds. More importantly, they had gained access to the civilian broadcasting systems that would carry Dr. Kexlana's evidence to every inhabited world in hegemony space. Hegemony fleet is breaking formation, Tixera reported with obvious confusion. Multiple ships are stopping. They're not advancing to engage. Zyxthala checked her own sensors and saw that several hegemony vessels had indeed stopped their advance and were maintaining position rather than pressing their attack. Communication from the hegemony fleet, Rodriguez announced. It's Admiral Krinala of the 1st Battle Group. She's requesting permission to discuss terms. Put her through, the Zyxthala ordered. Admiral Krinala's image appeared on the main screen. A seasoned Veltar officer whose reputation for tactical brilliance was known throughout the fleet. Her expression was grim as she addressed Zyxthala. Commander Zyxthala, she said formally, I am instructed by the High Command to demand your immediate surrender and the cessation of all rebel military operations. I'm afraid that's not possible, Zyxthala replied. We have a prior commitment to the truth. The truth. Krinala's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. Is that what you're calling treason now? That's what I'm calling the evidence that's about to be broadcast throughout the galaxy, Zyxthala said calmly. Evidence that will prove the hegemony has been systematically falsifying scientific data for 3 centuries to justify the oppression of billions of sapient beings. For a moment, Krinala said nothing. Then, quietly, what evidence? Complete genetic and cognitive analysis data for humans, Keth, and 6 other species. Documentation of the original classification decisions. Recordings of High Command meetings where the suppression policies were discussed and implemented. Zyxthala paused, and testimony from the officials who participated in those meetings, including Minister Velderan. The silence on the communication channel stretched for several seconds. Finally, Krinala spoke again. How long do I have to review this evidence? The broadcast begins in 30 minutes, Sarah interjected from her console. But I could transmit the core data package to your fleet immediately if you want to verify it independently. Do it, Krinala ordered. The next 30 minutes were unlike anything in the recorded history of galactic warfare. Instead of engaging in combat, the opposing fleets maintained defensive positions while officers on both sides reviewed the evidence packages that were about to be transmitted throughout hegemony space. Zyxthala watched her own tactical display as ship after ship in the hegemony fleet went dark, not because they were destroyed, but because their crews were shutting down weapon systems and repositioning to non-threatening configurations. Multiple communication requests from hegemony vessels, Rodriguez reported. They're asking for clarification about rebel integration policies. Tell them that any hegemony personnel who wish to join the Free World Alliance will be welcomed as full equals, Zyxthala replied. No retribution, no second-class status. We're building a galaxy based on cooperation, not revenge. Admiral Krinala is requesting private communication, the communications officer added. ZYXTALA nodded, and Krinala's image reappeared on her screen. I've reviewed your evidence, the Hegemony Admiral said without preamble. It's comprehensive and disturbing. You sound like you're not entirely surprised. There have been inconsistencies in official reports for years, discrepancies between field observations and classification data that never quite made sense. Krinala's expression was troubled. I think part of me always knew something was wrong, but it was easier to trust the system than to question it. It's not too late to make a different choice, ZYXTALA said gently. 17 ships in my battle group are requesting permission to stand down, Krinala said. Their crews have voted to defect to the rebellion, and the rest, waiting to see what I decide. Krinala looked directly at ZYXTALA through the screen. You realize that if I order my fleet to join you, the Hegemony's defensive capability around the capital will collapse entirely. I realize that if you order your fleet to join us, we can end this war today without any more bloodshed, ZYXTALA replied. The choice is yours, Admiral. The broadcast began precisely on schedule. Throughout Hegemony space, on every world where Veltar authority held sway, civilian communication networks carried the same message. Complete documentation of the lies that had built and maintained the Empire for 3 centuries. Dr. Kexlana's scientific evidence was damning enough, but it was Minister Veldaran's hashtag the hook in the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 alien species bow to the might of the Hegemony Empire. Humans are nothing more than primitive savages, or so the universe believes. For 3 centuries, humanity has been classified as a class, 7 species, barely sentient, useful only as manual laborers and cannon fodder in the endless wars that rage across star systems. But what happens when the galaxy's greatest military strategist discovers that everything they've been told about humans is a lie? What happens when a single moment of vulnerability reveals a truth so shocking it could topple empires and rewrite the very foundations of galactic civilization? Commander ZYXTALA has conquered worlds, commanded fleets of 1 million ships, and never known defeat. She is the daughter of the Hegemony's supreme chancellor, genetically engineered for perfection, trained from birth to lead. In her eyes, humans are just another expendable resource, until one day, in the heat of battle, her armor fails, and a human soldier does something no alien has ever done before. He helps her. What she discovers next will challenge everything she believes about strength, honor, and what it truly means to be evolved. Because sometimes the greatest power in the universe isn't found in advanced technology or superior genetics. It's found in the one thing the galaxy forgot how to recognize: humanity.